Los Angeles glittered under the evening sun, its skyscrapers glowing like golden towers of ambition. In one of the wealthiest neighborhoods, a mansion of glass and steel rose above the hills, reflecting the city lights before they even arrived. Inside lived Charles Anderson, a 55-year-old billionaire whose name carried weight across industries. His empire was built on technology and finance, and to the outside world, he was a man who had everything: power, influence, wealth. But behind those shimmering walls, silence ruled, for his only daughter, Olivia Anderson, just 13 years old, lived a life of quiet loneliness. Olivia had been born with a spinal condition that left her unable to walk. Her childhood was a series of hospital rooms, therapy sessions, and treatments that promised more than they delivered. Charles spared no expense, flying in specialists from Europe, booking the most advanced therapy centers in America, and investing in experimental surgeries. Yet every effort ended with the same result: Olivia in her wheelchair, watching the world pass her by. For Charles, failure wasn't a word he tolerated, yet here was the one thing all his billions could not fix. The mansion, though magnificent, felt like a prison to Olivia. She had everything: luxury clothes, expensive gadgets, a private tutor, and even her own wing in the house. Yet none of these filled the hollow ache in her heart. From her room, she often stared through the glass walls at the city below, watching kids run, skate, or ride. Bicycles, their laughter carried by the wind. She longed for that freedom, to feel the ground beneath her feet, to race down a street without help. But instead, she felt trapped in a golden cage. Charles loved his daughter, but his love was often disguised behind busy schedules and business calls. He told himself that his work was for her, that every late night at the office was so she'd never want for anything. Yet Olivia didn't want more diamonds or dresses. She wanted someone to sit with her, to see her not as a fragile patient, but as a young girl with dreams. Charles, blinded by his drive, never saw the emptiness his absence left in her heart. One blistering summer afternoon, fate intervened in the unlikeliest way. Olivia and Charles were returning from yet another doctor's appointment across town. Their limousine, polished to perfection, glided through a quieter neighborhood when, suddenly, the engine sputtered and died. The chauffeur pulled over near an old mechanic's garage, its sign half rusted, the smell of oil and grease heavy in the air. Charles fumed, pacing angrily, frustrated at the inconvenience. Olivia, however, curiously observed the surroundings. That's when Daniel Carter appeared. At 37, Daniel was a struggling mechanic, his shirt stained with grease, his hands rough from years of work. His garage was small, filled with second-hand tools and old cars that seemed long, past their prime. He barely made enough to keep the lights on, but what he lacked in wealth, he carried in heart. Spotting the limo, he approached with a polite nod, offering to take a look. Charles dismissed him coldly, irritated by the delay. But Daniel's attention wasn't on Charles. He noticed Olivia sitting quietly in her wheelchair, her wide brown eyes filled with a sadness he recognized. While Charles barked into his phone, Daniel crouched beside her, speaking gently. "Machines can be fixed," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "But sometimes people just need someone who believes in them." Olivia blinked, surprised. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, not the doctors, not the staff, not even her father. They all treated her like a patient, fragile and broken. Daniel saw her differently. For the first time in years, Olivia felt seen, not as the billionaire's disabled daughter, but as a human being. She found herself smiling faintly, a spark of warmth she hadn't felt in a long time. Daniel didn't ask about her condition, didn't pity her, and didn't look away in discomfort. Instead, he treated her like any other person he might talk to on the street. That simple act of kindness planted a seed in her heart. She didn't know why, but she wanted to hear. More from this man who lived in a world so far from her own. Charles eventually dragged her attention back, ordering Daniel to fix the limo quickly. Daniel got to work, his hands moving skillfully under the hood, his focus sharp. Olivia watched him closely, fascinated. She'd never seen someone work so hard with so little, pouring determination into every turn of a wrench. There was a quiet dignity about him that intrigued her. When the engine roared back to life, Charles tossed a wad of cash his way, but Daniel only took what was fair. That gesture didn't escape Olivia's notice. As the limo pulled away, Olivia glanced back at the small garage growing smaller in the distance. A thought tugged at her heart. Daniel's words, his smile, his sincerity. In a life surrounded by polished wealth and empty comforts, that brief moment felt more real than anything she had experienced. She couldn't explain it, but something told her that this meeting wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something that might just change her world forever. That night, Olivia lay awake in her vast bedroom, the city lights glowing outside her window. Her father had already left for a dinner meeting, her nanny had turned in, and the silence of the mansion pressed in around her. But in her mind, she replayed Daniel's words again and again. Machines can be fixed, but sometimes people just need someone who believes in them. She whispered it softly to herself, almost like a secret. For the first time, hope flickered in her heart, fragile but alive. Days after the limo incident, Olivia couldn't stop thinking about Daniel's words. His voice, calm yet firm, echoed in her heart. Machines can be fixed, but people need someone who believes in them. Those words became a secret melody. She repeated quietly to herself. One morning, instead of asking to be taken to another therapy session, Olivia whispered to her driver, "Can you take me back to the garage we stopped at?" The driver hesitated, but something in her eyes convinced him. Within minutes, the black car rolled into the quiet street where Daniel's modest garage stood. Daniel was under the hood of a rusty pickup when he heard the sound of tires crunching gravel. Wiping his hands on a rag, he looked up, surprised to see the sleek black car again. When Olivia's wheelchair rolled forward, his face broke into a warm smile. "Back so soon," he teased gently. Olivia nodded, her cheeks pink. I just wanted to see how things worked," she admitted. Daniel chuckled, inviting her inside the cluttered but welcoming space. The garage smelled of oil and old metal, yet it felt alive with energy, unlike the cold silence of her mansion. At first, her visits were brief, just a few minutes stolen before her father noticed. But soon, she returned almost every day, eager to hear Daniel's stories and watch him work. He told her about the struggles of keeping his small garage alive, the cars he had saved from scrap, and the times he nearly gave up but kept going. Olivia listened intently, fascinated. She had met countless polished professionals in her life, but none spoke with the raw honesty Daniel carried. He didn't sugarcoat reality, yet he always found a way to end his stories with hope. In turn, Olivia shared her frustrations. She talked about endless doctor appointments, about how people looked at her with pity, and about how her father never understood what she truly wanted. Daniel didn't interrupt with advice or sympathy. He just listened, nodding as though every word mattered. "You're not broken, Olivia," he said one afternoon as he tightened a bolt. "You just need the right tools to live life your way, and sometimes the right people." That sentence lit something inside her, something the richest therapists had never given her: belief. One hot afternoon, Daniel wheeled an old, dust-covered go-kart into the center of the garage. Its paint was chipped, its seat worn, but his eyes gleamed with excitement. "I was thinking," he said, scratching his head, "why not make this something you can control with your hands?" Olivia's eyes widened. "You mean drive it myself?" Daniel grinned. "Exactly. No doctors, no limits, just you." She had never dared imagine herself behind a wheel, yet Daniel spoke as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Her heart raced with anticipation as he began sketching adjustments on a piece of cardboard. Days turned into weeks as Daniel worked tirelessly, welding, hammering, and modifying the go-kart. Olivia came every afternoon, watching him transform it piece by piece. Sometimes she held tools for him, laughing when her small hands fumbled. Other times she asked questions about engines and mechanics, eager to learn. Daniel explained patiently, his voice kind and encouraging. He never once treated her as fragile or incapable. Instead, he made her feel like a partner in the project. The more time she spent there, the less lonely she felt. The mansion might have been larger, but the garage felt like home. Finally, the day came. The go-kart stood gleaming under the dim light of the garage, now fitted with hand controls that Daniel had carefully crafted. Olivia's hands trembled with excitement as she settled into the seat, gripping the controls. Daniel knelt beside her, explaining how to start, steer, and stop. Her heart pounded as she pressed forward, and the engine roared to life. Slowly, carefully, she moved forward, the cart rolling out of the garage and into the open space outside. Wind brushed her face as she picked up speed. For the first time in her life, she wasn't being pushed. She was in control. Her laughter rang out across the street, echoing off the old brick walls of the neighborhood. Daniel jogged beside her, grinning proudly as she maneuvered the cart around. "You're a natural," he shouted. Olivia's face glowed with pure joy, something her mansion hadn't heard in years. In that moment, she didn't feel like the girl trapped in a wheelchair. She felt free, unstoppable, alive. When she finally stopped, panting from laughter, she looked at Daniel with tears in her eyes. "I never thought I could feel this," she whispered. Daniel only smiled. "Told you, you're not broken." But back in the mansion, Charles had begun to notice his daughter's absences. He asked the driver, pressed the staff, and finally learned the truth that Olivia had been sneaking off to a mechanic's garage. Fury surged through him. He couldn't believe his daughter would waste her time in a place so beneath their name. To him, Daniel was just another poor man trying to gain favor with the Anderson fortune. Yet despite his anger, a small, nagging part of him wondered why was Olivia suddenly smiling more. Why had she started? Humming to herself again. He couldn't remember the last time she looked this alive. Determined to see for himself, Charles left the mansion one rainy evening and followed his daughter's car to the quiet neighborhood. He stepped out, umbrella in hand, his polished shoes splashing in puddles as he approached the garage. The sound of laughter reached his ears, unlike anything he had heard from Olivia in years. Curious and unsettled, he stepped inside. What he saw stopped him cold. Olivia, his fragile daughter, was behind the wheel of a small go-kart, driving circles with her hands on the controls, her face glowing with freedom. Daniel stood nearby, cheering her on, his clothes soaked in oil and rain. For a long moment Charles couldn't breathe. He had spent fortunes chasing the best medical minds, demanding miracles, writing checks that could buy entire hospitals. Yet here, in a small, shabby garage, his daughter had found what all his billions had failed to give her: happiness. Her laughter filled the air like music, warming the coldest corners of his heart. Charles felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Pride, hope, love. For once, he didn't see a wheelchair or a limitation. He saw his daughter radiant and alive, finally tasting freedom. And in that moment, Charles realized he had been blind all along. The night Charles saw his daughter laughing in the garage stayed with him like a haunting melody. When the rain finally stopped, he stepped forward, his expensive shoes squeaking on the concrete floor. Daniel looked up, surprised to see the man in a tailored suit standing by the doorway. Olivia froze, gripping the controls, her joy replaced with fear. "Dad," she whispered. Charles held up his hand, his voice sharp. "We need to talk." For the first time, Olivia felt torn between the two worlds. She lived in the golden mansion she never asked for, and the small garage that gave her freedom. When Daniel wheeled a stool forward for Charles to sit, the billionaire refused, standing stiffly as water dripped from his umbrella. "How much?" Charles asked flatly, his voice cutting through the silence. Olivia's eyes widened in horror. "Dad, no!" But before she could finish, Daniel stepped forward, meeting the older man's gaze without flinching. His hands were stained with oil, his clothes ragged, but his voice was steady. "I don't want your fortune, sir. I just want her to feel alive." The words echoed through the garage, simple yet sharp enough to pierce even Charles's hardened pride. For a moment, Charles didn't know what to say. He had expected greed, flattery, or at least some trace of ambition, but Daniel's eyes held nothing but sincerity. No agenda, no calculation, just a genuine desire to see Olivia smile. Olivia looked between them, her heart pounding. "He means it, Dad," she said softly. "He's never asked me for anything, not once." Charles, who had spent decades surrounded by people chasing his money, felt something inside him stir. He realized that in his obsession to fix his daughter with wealth, he had forgotten the one thing she truly needed. Someone who believed in her. The days that followed were filled with a fragile truce. Charles allowed Olivia to continue visiting the garage, though he lingered nearby, watching closely. Slowly, he saw what he had missed all these years. Olivia wasn't just learning about machines or enjoying small rides. She was learning confidence, independence, and joy. Daniel spoke to her like an equal, teaching her that her disability was not the end, but the beginning of a different kind of strength. Charles found himself drawn to their conversations, standing silently in the corner as Olivia laughed, her voice brighter than he had ever heard it. Weeks later, something remarkable happened. During a routine therapy session, Olivia asked her physical therapist to adjust her braces. The therapist hesitated, but complied. With Daniel's encouragement echoing in her heart, Olivia gripped the parallel bars tightly, her arms trembling. Slowly, shakily, she lifted herself onto her feet. Charles, who had insisted on attending that day, stood frozen, his breath caught in his throat. "Dad," Olivia whispered, sweat dripping down her forehead, "I can do this." Step by step she moved forward, braces clinking softly. By the time she reached the end of the bars, tears blurred her vision. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, a miracle in motion. The room erupted in applause. Therapists and staff astonished. Charles rushed forward, kneeling beside his daughter with tears streaking his cheeks. For years he had spent millions chasing breakthroughs, believing money could buy her future. Yet it was Daniel's belief, patience and friendship that unlocked her strength. "I'm so proud of you," he whispered, his voice breaking. Olivia hugged him tightly, and for the first time in years, their embrace felt genuine, unburdened by pity or frustration. Daniel stood back, smiling quietly, his heart swelling with pride. He had never imagined his small acts could spark such change, yet here it was, unfolding before his eyes. News of Olivia's progress spread quickly among her father's circle. The girl, who had once been hidden from social events, now became an inspiration. But Charles knew this wasn't about publicity or reputation. It was about gratitude. One evening, he drove to Daniel's garage himself, without his usual entourage. He stepped inside, the smell of oil and steel mixing with the faint sound of a radio. Daniel looked up from under a hood, surprised to see the billionaire without his daughter. "She told me what you've done," Charles said, his voice quieter than Daniel had ever heard, "and I want to do something in return." Daniel wiped his hands, wary. "I don't need your money." Charles shook his head. "It's not money, it's a partnership. You see broken machines, I see broken lives. Together, maybe we can fix both. He explained his vision, a foundation that would build adaptive vehicles and mobility aids for children across America, giving them freedom they had never known. He wanted Daniel to lead it, not as an employee, but as a partner. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he listened. He had spent his life in a dusty garage, patching up old cars. Now he was being offered the chance to change lives on a national scale. It wasn't an easy decision. Daniel feared leaving behind the only life he had ever known, but when he thought of Olivia's smile, her determination, and her first shaky steps, he realized this was bigger than himself. "If we're doing this," he said, "finally, it has to be about them, not about money or reputation. Every kid deserves to feel what Olivia felt that day." Charles nodded, humbled. For once, it wasn't about power or wealth, it was about impact. They shook hands, sealing a partnership built not on contracts but on trust and shared purpose. Months later, the dusty garage transformed into something extraordinary. Volunteers arrived, engineers joined, and families traveled from across the country. Adaptive vehicles lined the lot, each tailored for a child with unique needs. Daniel guided the mechanics, his hands steady with purpose, while Charles handled the funding quietly, no longer flaunting his wealth, but using it for good. Olivia became the heart of it all, welcoming each child with a smile and encouraging words. She showed them her braces, telling them, "If I can do it, so can you." Her laughter, once confined to a small garage, now filled entire rooms. For Daniel, the transformation was overwhelming. He had started with nothing, a man scraping by, living day to day, yet his kindness had created ripples he never imagined. Families hugged him, children called him a hero, and yet he always pointed to Olivia. "She's the brave one," he would say. For Charles, the journey was equally profound. He realized he had failed as a father, not because he lacked resources, but because he hadn't given his daughter what Daniel had: unconditional belief. And so, in Daniel, he found not just a partner, but the example of the man he had always wished to be. As for Olivia, she blossomed. She had found her first true friend in Daniel, someone who saw her beyond wealth and disability. She had found strength within herself, learning that courage often came from the unlikeliest places. And she had found her voice, speaking at events and inspiring countless children who once felt trapped as she had. Her story spread across the country, not as the tale of a billionaire's daughter, but of a girl who learned to fly with wheels, braces, and the belief of a broke mechanic who changed everything. In the end, the foundation wasn't just about vehicles or mobility, it was about hope. Every adaptive car built carried a story, every smile carried a legacy. And it all began in a small, dusty garage where a billionaire's disabled daughter met a struggling mechanic. Two worlds collided, and from that collision came something brighter than either could have imagined. For Daniel, love and purpose filled his once empty life. For Charles, humility and gratitude softened his once stone heart. And for Olivia, the golden cage of her mansion finally shattered, replaced with open skies, wheels of freedom, and steps toward a future she had once thought impossible.